Well, welcome to Facebook Live this morning. Lindsay Few is here to join me. You know Lindsay from our podcast, as she is the head of our podcast. She does content. She edits everything I write, and she is such an asset to Awesome Marriage. So thanks for joining us this morning, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Kim.
It's good to have you. Well, we want to talk a little bit about speaking life. Why is that an important thing for us to talk about?
Oh man, I love this topic because I don't think I'm very good at it. So it's of note to me because I struggle with it. But also I had this really clear memory of being in youth group and like the common prayer request because I grew up going to church and youth group, and the thing we talked about with our words was just not using bad ones, was just not cussing, because I'm from the South, we cuss. And so that was like the standing prayer request. And like the one sin that you could kind of admit to safely was like, Lord, help me not to cuss and say bad words. And then as an adult too, as a parent, I've got 4 kids and they've got lots of personalities. So I'm constantly finding myself in the middle of their disputes about their words, and I'm always telling them what they shouldn't say because they say a lot of mean things. But really, when we look at scripture, the scripture is very clear that the power of life and death are in the tongue.
Mm.
So we need to be talking about how to wield that power of life and not just try to avoid saying bad things.
Yeah, that's so good because I think it is. It's more of a heart thing, don't you think? It's kind of
Mhm.
than it is just the words that we say and what's behind it. And I think as I growing up, I can remember testing out different words because you just want to see how people react to them, and is this really
Yeah.
as bad as everybody says it is? And so I think it's sometimes part of growing up. Maybe it's just a guy thing, but then you realize, what do my words do to someone? And it's
Mhm.
different when, as guys, we can kid around. And I think there's a level that we kid and each other understands, whether it's in the
Mm.
locker room or with friends and stuff. But there's a time where you can cross a line and you win somebody or you hurt
Mhm.
somebody because you make it
Mhm.
personal as opposed to just in general guy stuff that we kind of
Mm.
can talk about, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so, and then I think when we take it into a marriage, there's so many couples that I work with that so much damage has been done by words.
Mm.
Never been hurt physically, but that the words and how they've wounded and how they've, when someone says, I wish I never married you, uh,
Mm.
I could have done better than you, or things like that. They're just devastating. And it's really hard, depending on how sensitive someone is, to recover from some of those things. And they don't
Yeah,
speak
they
lies.
stick with you. They really do stick with you. It's hard because you
Yes.
can't really unsay things.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had those times when I just thought, "Is there any way I can start it out of my mouth? Can I catch it before it gets to someone
Yeah.
else?" And it
Yeah.
can't. It's like you just wanna grab
Oh,
it and
yeah.
pull it back in.
The unsend button, like
It
unsend that
Oh,
email.
yes, I love the new unsend,
Yeah,
thing on
it helps.
Facebook, on Messages now, because I sent one yesterday, and I thought, "That was so stupid." So I just unsent it, and hopefully nobody read it before I
Yeah.
So,
Oh, it's
what are
mhm.
ways that spouses, let's take it into marriage, can speak death into a marriage?
Yeah, well, I mean, you listed out some really, really tough ones. I mean, just some really harsh words and cruel words that I hope have not been said in marriages, but we all know, things come out of our mouths sometimes faster than we realize. But there's also some really subtle things. We've got like sarcasm,
Mm,
nitpicking, being critical, fault finding, all these kind of things, insisting on our own way, I think is a way of speaking death too, because it's not really looking for God's way in a marriage. It's just looking for protecting myself or getting what I want. And so I think there's a lot of obvious and there's a lot of subtle ones too. And I know about a lot of those just because I've done them and I'm not proud of it. But I think this is what's so interesting in this conversation is there's so much room on the positive side too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we were worse about it early in marriage, I think, and probably in
Mhm.
the early years because we were still, I don't know what we were trying to do. I guess establish territories, or,
Sure.
we're both type A, and so it was kind of like we both had to win, or all those kind of things. And we eventually we do really well. We don't do much of that, but you can still, every once in a while, it still
Mhm.
can kind of crop up. I think it's something that maybe it's all we always have to walk to think through, because we are selfish and we are sinful, and so
Mhm.
sometimes those thoughts are going through our mind. And what God really helped me see is, just because that thought goes through my mind, it's not sin. It hasn't hurt anybody. But if I say it, then it becomes sin. Then it becomes hurtful
Mhm.
to someone else. So I think, a lot of times people say, "Well, I thought about that." Well, a lot of times you don't really control what you think about. Now, if you continue to dwell on it, sure, that's your choice. But it's like, okay, that came to my mind. Well, I'm not going to say that, so you dismiss it.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can't help what going through your mind. Another thing I thought of when you said that I think is really destructive is when you say something to your spouse that is speaking death, and then you say, "Oh, I was just kidding."
Mm, mhm.
And
Mhm.
that doesn't work. I mean, you've
Yeah.
already said it. It's like there's just no way to cover that up at that point, or to get by
Yeah.
with it. I had a couple of, I was just thinking of, and made me think of that, and he would do that all the time.
Ooh.
And so to him, it was like, well, I was just kidding. She's too
Mhm.
sensitive and stuff like that. And I said, yes, she is sensitive, and that's why you can't say that anymore, because
Yeah.
it hurts her. And when you say I was just kidding, it really is very confusing to her. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think we do things like that sometimes too. And that's speaking death, kind of like with a asterisk on it, because you're
Yeah.
discounting her or him
Yeah.
that received it.
Yeah, and to know that about your spouse, to know they're sensitive, and then to almost, prey upon that, it seems extra unkind. That's really not kind at all.
No, it's pretty narcissistic when you really think about it. It really is taking advantage of that
Yeah.
other person. So, what would keep spouses from speaking life in a marriage? We're talking about how bad it can be, how good it can
Mhm.
be. To speak death is bad, to speak life is good. What keeps us from doing that?
Yeah, well, so I'm glad you brought up just a minute ago the thing about our thought life, because I know one thing. When I went into marriage, I thought that being honest with Brian, my husband, meant I had to say whatever I thought. I just, that's it's funny now because it's like a really immature way to think about things. But I would just think we've committed to be honest, and I'm just going to say whatever pops in my mind. But a lot of the things that pop in your mind are awful and shouldn't be said, or a thought. And like you said, it's true. If you filter that thought, if you stop and consider, okay, we need to say that. No, we don't need to say that. Is it even true? Probably not. If I say I wish I'd never married you, I might feel that in the moment. That doesn't mean it's true. And so to
Absolutely.
to kind of learn to not say the rash things, that was just a habit that I had because of immaturity. But there are a lot of habits, a lot of different examples we might have seen were not examples of speaking life
Mm,
in a family. My family of origin, we were not really a words of affirmation type family. We just didn't really operate in that way. I'm not a huge words of affirmation person, but Brian is. And so for me, I missed a lot of opportunities to speak life to him because it wasn't like my native language. And I think
yeah.
another way is just a lot of times in marriage we can get critical or we can compare our spouse. And so we miss opportunities to speak life because we're not focusing on the good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. And it's interesting what you said that about Brian, but it helped. You had to realize this is something that is he looks at different than I do. And
Yeah.
I've got it.
Mhm.
There's things I just can't do it. And I think it is. I think that's interesting, because I think sometimes we do that. Well, I'm going to be totally honest.
Mhm.
But if I'm upset at Nancy and I say something, there's a good chance it's not going to be something that I really believe and say. But depending on the sensitivity of your spouse, it may be hard to take that back. It may be
Mhm.
harder to overcome in those
Yeah.
situations, for
Yeah.
sure. So, what changes can help us change our habits with our words? Okay, we're talking about it. We're talking about this can be a real problem. How do we break those habits?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that one great thing is that just being aware of it is going to help you to start changing. A lot
Yes.
of it, some of the stuff we've talked about was, growing in spiritual maturity,
Mm,
learning how to not just say whatever comes across your mind. And that's part of that is growing closer to God, and growing more in his character, to have kindness, gentleness, self control, all the fruits of the spirit. But I think that the desire to change is like a huge help in this because kind of like that confirmation bias. When we start looking for something, we'll see it more. So if you start looking for ways to speak life, you'll see more ways. If you start looking for positive things to say about your spouse, you'll see more of them. And so by doing that, you're kind of changing your own lens of how you look at them and how you speak to them simply because you're looking for ways to change it. So I
Yeah,
think just looking at that and being interested in changing that and asking God for his help is going to get you some change.
absolutely.
Mhm.
No, I agree. I think that makes a huge difference, and it just, I think being aware of it, um, and it is reframing your spouse. If you are framing your spouse in a negative way, I mean, that's
Mhm.
not really going to get you what you want in a marriage. And so,
Mm.
focus on the positive things. There's a reason you married this person, and
Mhm.
things that you loved about this person or love about this person, and focus on those things and pray for your spouse and let God make the changes that need to be made in your spouse.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought of that I have learned over the last years is just the questions to ask yourself if you are thinking, should I say it or not? And should it be said? Should it be said by me? And should it be said now? Because
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that might be good to say, but one, that might be the wrong time, and you may not be
Mhm.
the right person to say it to your spouse. There are so many times in counseling where I'll say something in counseling, and afterwards, one of the spouses say, "I've been telling her or him that." And no, he never
Right.
listened to me, but he listened to you. And I said, "Well, you're in
Yeah.
counseling. You're here to get better." And so, yeah, they listened at that time. And so,
Yeah.
uh, just adding some wisdom in it, I guess, and asking God to help us
Mhm.
to be wise with our
Mhm.
words
Mhm.
toward our spouse, I think can help. But I think it's an easy thing, especially in our culture today when there has been so much friction, so much unkindness,
Mhm.
so many things that we've seen in the last couple of years that it's kind of easy to fall into that. And
Mhm.
so if you feel like you're kind of falling into that in your marriage or with your spouse, this would be a really good time to say, I'm going to reframe my spouse. I'm going to quit doing those things.
Mhm.
I'm going to
Yeah.
speak life. And when you speak life, don't you think that, like, when you affirm Brian and words of affirmation and things that speak life into him, what do you see in him?
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of appreciation and just kind of a warmth. It just kinda lights him up, and
Yeah.
that's such a great thing to see. For me, learning to do that when I hadn't, it's like, "Oh, I never even knew." I never knew the effect that would have.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think maybe if you're listening today or watching today and you feel like I'm not doing a good job, just try it for a month. Say something positive to your spouse every day for a month and then let us know what happens. I'd love to know.
I love that. And too, the reason this topic's on my mind, I wrote a YouVersion plan about it pretty recently. And this is one of those YouVersion devotionals where like you're looking for verses for the content and you have to just filter because there are a ton of them. Scripture is so full of like all this wisdom about using our words and the power of words. So I'll put that link to the YouVersion plan in the
Yeah,
description below because
absolutely.
to me, it's like seeing how much God values our words and how important those are for him kind of changed my mindset about how I'm using mine.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm glad you brought up the YouVersion plan, link to that, and people are watching. We've got, I think, I don't know how many YouVersion plans. I know we have over 40, maybe more than that
A lot.
now. With
Mhm,
some I write, some Lindsay, Christina, Tiffany, the
mhm.
different ones on our team have written, and we've had over. I was looking yesterday. We've had over 2,200,000 of our plans
Wow,
completed. So we would
so cool.
invite you to just go on YouVersion. You can put in my name or Awesome Marriage or both, and do the one Lindsay's talking about, and look what else we have there for you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
This has been fun. I think it's something that we all need to be aware of. I think it's easy to feel like we're rocking it for a while, and then something happens, and we get kind of ticked at our spouse, and we kind of go backwards. So I think it is something we always have to be aware of, and what a difference it makes when we speak life instead of speaking death into our spouse.
Mm.
Lindsay, thanks
Mm.
for joining me today. It's always great to have you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim.